Napoleon Bonaparte is one of the most important figures in French history and even European history. He is a name that has managed to impress the whole world with his skills in both the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars. It won most of the wars it fought and dominated the European continent until its defeat in 1815. The military tactics of Napoleon, one of the most successful masters of war tactics in history, continue to be taught as lessons in many military schools even today. He was born on the island of Corsica in the south of France on August 15, 1769, in a not-so-rich Bonaparte family. Since Napoleon's mother was a strict and disciplined woman, he was raised with a harsh education at a young age. When he was old enough to go to school, he went to France with his brother. He began to receive education at a military school here. Napoleon was an exemplary student who was successful in his classes. Although he was often ridiculed by those around him because of his short stature, he did not care much about it. He graduated shortly after and took over his job. Meanwhile, France was going through a very difficult period, having lost a very bloody war with Britain for 7 years. And France was in an economic crisis. This crisis affected only the people. The clergy, statesmen, and elite people in high positions were living their lives in wealth and ostentation as they wanted. The French people could not even find bread to eat and were hunting for mice in the streets. The people, who could not stand it any longer, started rebellions throughout the country in 1789, and as a result of great efforts, they dethroned the king, and a republican regime was established in his place. Napoleon would shine in this chaos environment. Things were still not going well in France. It was going through a period called the Period of Terror. Every person who opposed the government was sent to the guillotine and executed. The government gave a task to Napoleon and asked him to stop the chaos in the streets. The royalists revolted. Gang wars, the actions of the people with the security forces dragged France, which was already dealing with wars, into chaos again. Napoleon, who was in charge of suppressing the uprisings, massacred the rioting French people with cannons hidden in Paris without even blinking an eye. Napoleon suppressed this rebellion, which even the French army could not suppress, in just one day. He was promoted to Major General immediately after the rebellion he suppressed, and he was only 25 years old. Napoleon, who was at the head of the Italian armies, achieved great success in Italy. Napoleon, who was successful in 18 battles, completely expelled Austria from Italy and stood in front of Vienna. When he returned to France, he became a very popular person. The people declared Napoleon the hero of France, but Napoleon wanted more. He also gained political power with the taxes he collected after the Italian expedition. When Napoleon returned to France, he was given a new mission to land in Britain, but Napoleon opposed this. France did not have a strong navy, so he offered the government to cut off England's colonial roads, so England would automatically weaken and lose the war. The government found this offer reasonable and accepted it. He invaded Egypt, which was Ottoman territory. He managed to deceive the Egyptian people by telling them that he was a Muslim. Napoleon, who continued his activities here, received bad news. The Egyptian navy was set on fire by Britain, and Napoleon was left stranded in Egypt. In addition, the Egyptian people understood that Napoleon was not a Muslim, and that he came to Egypt to colonize. Napoleon literally committed genocide against the Egyptian people, who revolted and suppressed the rebellion. Napoleon then turned towards Palestine. His aim was to conquer from Egypt to India and capture India, the largest colony of the British. He attacked the city of Jaffa with his troops and slaughtered approximately 10,000 civilians and soldiers. In 1799, Napoleon arrived in front of the Akka castle. While he thought he would advance very confidently, there was someone he did not take into account. The commander of Akka Castle was a 90-year-old Turkish Ottoman Pasha. His name was Cezar Ahmed Pasha. No matter what Napoleon did, he could not capture the castle. He suffered his first defeat in history by the Turks. He said these words that will go down in history: "Give me an army of Turks, and I will bring the world to its knees." After this defeat, Napoleon returned to Egypt and received bad news. France had suffered great defeats from the British, and they were calling Napoleon back to France. When Napoleon came to France, he staged a coup d'etat and declared himself king in 1804. Napoleon was at war with almost all of Europe, but he used his military genius to inflict countless defeats on European states. Napoleon won so many victories that he brought almost all of Europe under French rule. Napoleon had to defeat the British allies to end the war completely. He started to march towards Moscow with his huge army of 850,000 people, and he did not realize what a big mistake this would be for Napoleon. Napoleon was advancing with more victories every day in the battles with the Russians and was getting one step closer to Moscow. Napoleon, who finally reached Moscow, fell into the trap of the Russians. The real enemy was not the Russians, but the dull winter. He had to fight the coldest winter of the 19th century. He had to return to France and lost more than half of his army in the freezing Russian cold. Taking this opportunity, the coalition forces and the British attacked the French, destroyed the French army, and sent Napoleon into exile. Napoleon died of stomach cancer while he was in prison on May 5, 1821, at the age of 50.